All right, I'm here with my friend Adam Wathan. We've actually been friends for a while, like way back in the recording studio days, and it's really interesting. We've kind of followed a similar path in terms of our passions and business and all that stuff. So, Adam, why don't you just give people an idea of what you do?
Sure. I'm kind of like a software developer by trade, but these days I make a living creating like training products for other software developers, like books and courses and stuff like that. So I've put out four products total since my first one in May 2016. And that's kind of what I do full time now, ever since releasing the first book.
Yeah, and you weren't always into programming though, or were you? I know you didn't always do it as a job, but you used to come in and help me out in the recording studio like way before this, and then you were into that stuff. So how did you transition out of that into programming, and why?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny story. I've actually like always been into programming since I was a little kid. Um, and making websites or trying to make little games in QBasic or HyperCard or whatever. And I went to the university, Wilfrid Laurier University for computer science for one semester and then dropped out because I cared more about playing in bands and stuff. And none of my friends were in university. I was the only one. So it was kind of hard to get, absorbed into that world. I just saw it as this like annoying chore I had to do on the side while I was like, trying to get huge with my band and whatever.
Yeah.
um, so I did that for a semester and just dropped out because I hated it and it felt like it was like a distraction from the stuff I was actually excited about.
Hmm.
And a few years later, I decided to get into sort of like the recording home studio sort of game. After leaving this job that I had out in Fort McMurray, Alberta, doing like data entry stuff. So I started this little home studio, and what happened was I got into using this tool Reaper for all my recording stuff. And what I liked about it is like super, super customizable compared to a lot of the other stuff out there. A little bit rough around the edges compared to Pro Tools in a lot of ways, but for me, like the flexibility and customizability and like being able to create all my own keyboard shortcuts and all this stuff kind of made the trade-off worthwhile. But what was really cool about it was like scriptable. So I found myself like basically building custom features for the software. I even built like a complete Beat Detective clone for Reaper.
All right.
And what I found was like as I was kind of doing this stuff and hacking on this stuff, I hadn't programmed in probably like I don't know, like 3 years or something. And it kind of just reminded me how much I enjoyed doing it and how fun it was. And I got to a point where I was actually having more fun just like extending this tool and building features for it than I was actually recording bands. So when I kind of realized that like the recording stuff was never going to work out, it's hard to make a ton of money doing that stuff if you're not super super invested into kind of growing it, and I wasn't really enjoying it anyways. I decided to go back to college for software engineering, so I did like a shorter 2-year program, and ever since then I've kind of just been doing that stuff for a living.
Right. Man, that's kind of crazy that it's like you dropped out of university for the computer stuff and then went into music to follow, your passion, like trying to follow the dream.
Yeah.
And then in a weird way, through doing that, it like brought you back to your interest in programming.
Yeah.
And then, there's a lot more to the story after that, which is it's pretty cool. So after you went back to college, so then you ended up getting just a regular kind of job at a programming company or
Yeah. So basically, it was a 3-year program, but in between the second and third year, they do like basically a full year of co-op. So sort of like an internship, paid internship. And I got a job at a kind of a web agency that built sites and apps for clients. So once I got that job, I just never went back and finished the third year of school because the only reason I went to school was to have enough on my resume to be able to get my first job. And after that, the schooling doesn't matter anyways. So since I was like in my mid 20s, had a mortgage and stuff like that, it seems like not the best idea to take another year off of life and have to live off debt to keep going to school. So yeah, I just kind of did the bare minimum necessary to get my foot in the door somewhere, and then did that for about 4 years, maybe 3 years, 3 or 4 years before I released my first training product, and have been
okay.
solo ever since.
Right. So, okay, wow, 4 years at that job. And I mean, you recently had $1 million launch, which I want to get into soon. But first,
Sure.
like, that wasn't your first launch. So what made you start? What gave you the idea to do a programming course in the first place?
Yeah. So it's kind of hard for me to remember exactly what was going through my head, but um, I feel like my whole life I've kind of just loved making things, right? Especially just loved creating really polished, just finished things that I can put out into the world. Like I remember even being a little kid when I was like 10 years old or 9 years old, waking up early to go down to our new 486 computer and like work on this Doom tutorial that I was working on. You know what I mean? And just like making little ASCII art to like put at the top of the files. And I just had so much fun just like creating these like polished, finished pieces of work. And even when I was into all the music stuff. I was writing up tutorials on how to do things or creating screencasts or whatever. I've just always loved putting stuff like that out into the world. So when I got into programming, I'm a really voracious learner, so I spend a lot of time reading things and watching videos. And when I get obsessed with a topic, I just like can't stop learning about it. And in the programming world, especially, there's a lot of content that's just created by people who are like my peers, really, people who like self-publish little ebooks and put them up on the internet. Like there's a site LeanPub that sells a lot of programmer ebooks that are just written by other people. And when I saw that other people were doing this sort of thing, I thought, man, it'd be kind of cool to do something like this myself, especially because with all the stuff that I've been learning and trying to get better at, there was a lot of things I was finding that I felt there wasn't great information out there, at least like not resources that were the type of resource I wish existed for myself. Like I spent a lot of time trying to like piece together information from different kind of communities who worked in programming languages that weren't the programming languages I worked in, and just trying to learn from other people's approaches. And I finally came up with, approaches that I liked for the way I was doing things. And I wish there was like one consolidated resource for some of that stuff.
Right.
So I thought, maybe I can do something like this myself, and had a lot of false starts over the years, making little things. Like I wrote like half of a ebook on like strength training at one point because I was a competitive powerlifter for a number of years. Um, I started working on like a guide for like Reaper for Pro Tools users. That was like I never finished, and so I had a lot of false starts. Never started to finish anything, but then one day I remember seeing what you had been up to with your stuff, and I saw that you put out that first hardcore mixing book, I think it was.
Yeah, of
And
course. Yeah.
I can't even remember how we got talking about it. I can't remember if I emailed you about it or messaged you on Facebook or
Yeah.
something, but
You emailed me and then we went for coffee.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you remember that story better than me? Like I remember going out for coffee and talking about it, but I don't really remember like how it happened.
Yeah. So we yeah, I just remember getting a message and you're like, "Hey, I saw what you were doing. Like, do you want to get some coffee and catch up?" So I think we went to Starbucks or something, and then you were kind of asking me what I was up to, and I was like, "Oh, I just started selling these courses, and it's going really well." And I just remember like I I I didn't like tell you anything of like what to do or how to do it or anything, but I just remember you being like, I was thinking of like maybe I should do that for programming, and I was like, yeah, man, you should. And then I think a couple of months later, we met up again for coffee, and you were showing me the results, and I was just like absolutely blown away. So you had basically gone away from that meeting and done a lot, like launched a book and a course, your first one, and had just insane results. So yeah, maybe why don't we get into that? Is like, do you remember from after that coffee, like what you did to go on and launch your first product?
Yeah. So the thing that stood out to me, like when we had that conversation, is I went into it sort of like I had this idea in my head for doing this kind of pretty ambitious course on this topic that's test-driven development is what it's called. Maybe listeners will be familiar with that sort of thing, maybe not. But so I had this idea to do this course on this topic, but it was going to be really big, and I was working full time, and it was just like, man, I don't know how the hell I'm actually going to find time to make this thing. It seems like it's going to be a lot of work. And you said to me, like, why don't I try coming up with some like really small product idea? And you called it a tripwire product, just
Mm,
to sort of like get my feet wet selling stuff on the internet and just kind of get a small win and see what it's like to like actually get something finished and put it out, and use that to sort of like build up some momentum to try and maybe tackle a more ambitious project next. So I came away from that conversation trying to think like, okay, well, what are topics that I have some like authority or reputation in that I could use to put together like some sort of small thing. And there's this other programming topic. Basically, it's a uh, I was really into some of these like functional programming ideas, which again is kind of like a, it's kind of like a jargony term in programming or whatever. But I was learning about a lot of this stuff, and I built up a little bit of a reputation on the internet for it because I have a tendency to just get like really involved in the communities that I sort of hang out in when I'm learning about things or whatever I'm sort of interested in at the time. So like in the music days, I was like on like the Andy Sneap forum like all the time, and I built up a bit of a reputation there. Like I just always been present and involved in discussions and sharing things.
Yeah.
And you just get to know people in the community, and you get to sort of become like sort of a known quantity. And I
Yeah.
had been doing the same thing in the programming community, which mostly just exists on Twitter. We don't really have forums or anything like um, I've had in other communities I've existed in. But I was building a bit of a reputation for this functional programming stuff that I kind of mentioned, where I'd be like tweeting about like little, ideas that I had been working on or things that I'd figured out. And it got to the point where people would be like messaging me or tweeting at me saying like, hey, how would you apply those ideas to this problem that I have? So when I came away from that conversation with you, I thought, hey, this is a topic that people are already sort of looking to me for answers on. And I think I could put together like a little like 50-page sort of mini book or something that just had like, 10 or 15 of like some of my favorite ideas around this topic. So I don't, and this is the other thing that I don't remember super well, but somehow I got turned on to like Nathan Barry's content.
Right.
And this was probably just from searching around the internet, trying to see like what people do when they're going to release an ebook. Like, how do you actually do this in a way that is
Right.
going to has any chance of succeeding? You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to make
Yeah.
mistakes and just like work on it in silence and then launch it and then hope that people are going to buy it. So somehow I got turned on to his stuff, and I went and listened to like every podcast he had recorded and every article that he had read, and started learning about sort of his playbook for things. So what I did first is I just put together a landing page for this book, announced it on Twitter, collected a bunch of emails for it and stuff. It wasn't a huge number of people who signed up. Like, I think even by the time I launched it, I only had like 1,500 people on the list or something like that,
Okay.
but enough. Yeah, and I basically went away and started working on that book in sort of evenings and weekends. I thought I could do it in like 2 or 3 weeks because I had it planned for it to be such a small thing. But then I found like I was like 50 pages into the book, into writing it, and I hadn't even tackled like 30% of the content that I wanted to get through yet. So at the end of the day, it ended up being like 150 pages or something. And I also put together a bunch of screencasts to go along with it and some like sample code um, to kind of create a couple different tiers so I could try and maximize sort of the revenue from it. So
Right.
I launched that in like the end of May 2016.
Right. Before we, I'm gonna let you share the results for that first launch. But before we do that, there's a couple things that are standing out to me. And man, I can relate to so many of these things. Like you talked about being like just a creator, like you love to create things, and obviously we have shared that kind of thing through music, and then you through programming and stuff. And I feel the same thing. It's the same way. I love to just create stuff, and also just being a voracious learner is another huge thing, and also getting obsessed. And I recently remember watching Tony Robbins say something like, a couple of the ingredients to success are like getting obsessed about something and learning everything you can about it, and then taking massive action, which obviously you've done. So I just wanted to point those out. It's just like these are kind of key ingredients to, we could talk about the strategy of how you launch it, but like behind the scenes, it's like it's these kind of habits and character qualities that I
Yeah,
think actually lead to the success, right?
I think so too. I think like a common like mistake, that not necessarily a mistake, but like a common thread that I see in other people, makers trying to like put stuff out on the internet. A lot of the time people are motivated just by like, okay, I want to like buy my freedom from my job and I want to like make money selling products online or whatever. And it's like all their motivation is like financial. And because of that, I feel like they end up not succeeding because they don't have those sort of like inherent traits that make you succeed. Like you have to like be excited about what you're doing for reasons that you derive satisfaction from, like intrinsically, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that, goes a long way in actually being successful with this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also coming at it from an attitude of what can I create that is going to be awesome, that's going to help people, and that I'm going to enjoy creating and feel proud of.
Hmm.
And then the financial success is like a byproduct of that. Whereas like, I agree, like you said, a lot of people just like the goal or the I shouldn't say the goal, but like yeah, it's just like they're completely motivated by just what can I get out of it. It's like what is this going to give me, and then whatever they're going to create is just like an afterthought. So
Yeah,
you talked about how you took this attitude not only when you're about to release and sell a product, but all throughout, like always engaging in the communities and the stuff that you're interested in. And you talked about just sharing your tips on Twitter. I mean, what did that look like? Like, what can someone else do? Like, what type of things are you sharing? Is it more like you go, you're an avid learner, so you're learning all this stuff and you're trying it, you're putting it into action, and then you'll get a little nugget of info, and then you just go in the community and share it? Like, what does that look like?
totally. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple different things you could do. I think in general, like sort of the summary of all this advice, I think would just be to work in public as much as possible. So things that you kind of just put out there for the world to see, it doesn't have to be like your own innovations. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be like, oh, I had this sort of light bulb moment. Here's like some new idea that no one's ever thought of. It can just be like, a lot of the stuff that I share online that gets a lot of traction and stuff is just like, man, I just found out about this thing today. I can't believe I didn't know this already. And then there's a ton of other people who didn't know that either. You know what I mean?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
just like sharing what you're learning and excited about, even if it's not like ideas that you've created. And then a lot of the time you'll have like some unique take on something, or some way that you've applied some idea to your work that um, kind of feels novel or feels like something you don't see other people doing. And that's great too. But even if you're just sharing what you're learning, even if other people can learn that from somewhere else, it's a great way to build an audience and build some authority around a topic too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. What a great tip that is. Cause I think a lot of people think they're just like, well, I'm not an expert yet. I don't have the expertise to like teach everyone everything yet. So I'm not
Yeah.
going to put anything out there, but no, you're just saying like, you can just share what you're learning. And yeah,
And I think that's the best time to share stuff too. I think the best people to learn from are people who just learned what you want to learn, because like they can empathize with like where you are. Like I have a really hard time teaching topics that I learned many years ago to people, because I can't like really connect with like where that person is at
right.
that point, because I've kind of forgotten what it felt like to not know that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think if you're learning something, like it's awesome to be like blogging or screencasting or whatever about the stuff that you're learning, like only weeks after you've learned it, where like that memory of what it was like to not know that is still fresh, and you
Mm,
have the ability to connect really strongly with the people who are following behind you, because you remember exactly what it was like and like what was confusing about it and stuff like that.
yeah. Wow. That is an awesome tip for everyone out there, and something good for me to remember too. Like I can fall into that trap sometimes as well. So I guess back to this launch. So just so we kind of put all the pieces together. So you're engaging on Twitter and in this programmer community. You're giving value. You're helping people there, and people starting to message you. So you put up this landing page, which is basically, what did that landing page say? Just this book's coming soon.
Yeah, the first landing page was really simple. It was just kind of had like a title. I think I put together a little like quick mock up of like a book cover, and just kind of outlined what I was working on, some bullet points about some of the ideas that I wanted to talk about, and then had just a little mailing list sign up for people to subscribe if they were interested in receiving updates about it,
Yeah.
and being informed when it was available.
Okay. Awesome. So yeah, why don't you tell us what happened when you finally put it up for sale?
Yeah, so I put it up on May 18th. So I wrote this blog post that kind of talks about this whole launch, by the way,
Oh,
all the
awesome.
way all the way from like the idea to the launch. Includes every single email that I sent, how many subscribers received each one. So lots of really good like quantifiable information for anyone interested. So I sent out the email on May 18th, just saying it was now available for sale. Only 1,500 people were on the list at the time. And I kind of launched it silently the night before. So I kind of put together the website where people could buy it and stuff, and kind of flipped over like the coming soon page to like the actual you can buy it page. And I just like got all that stuff done, went to bed, and then waited till the morning to like get up and announce it. So when I woke up, I'd already had 14 people buy it, which was pretty cool because I hadn't even told anyone. And I was like pretty ecstatic about that because this was like my first time trying to sell something on the internet, right? So it's like a
Yeah.
really crazy feeling. So I sent out the email at like 7 in the morning, which was probably too early, but I was just too excited. And then I guess like by the end of the day, it had done like something like $25,000, or it looks like $28,000 in sales.
Wow.
And I ran that launch for like 3 days. It was kind of a really short launch window, which I definitely regret in hindsight. But even in those 3 days, it did about $65,000 US.
Wow.
When that was enough to convince me, like, okay, I should quit my job and use this money to live off of while I put together this course that I had originally wanted to do, the more ambitious product
Right.
that I knew there was a big market for, that I was even more excited about creating. Because I thought, if I don't do this now, I'm probably just going to use this money to pay off my student loans and a bunch of other crap, and I won't have this chance, to buy my own time for a while ever again. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, just amazing results. Yeah, I remember you texting me updates during the launch, and then we went for coffee again, and you were just like, were showing me. I was just like, I was totally blown away, and super pumped about those results. And yeah, I remember you quitting your job right after that. Was there any hesitation or fear there of like, man, am I going to be able to do this again, like before you quit your job, or were you just completely confident?
um, I felt pretty confident because I knew that this topic that I wanted to create this next product about had an even bigger market and was something that was like an even bigger pain point for people. But at the same time, like I'm sort of privileged enough to be in an industry where it's not hard to get another software development job, like
Right.
instantly.
Okay.
And having put out like a book and having like a bit of a following on Twitter, like I didn't have a huge following at the time. I think like around the time I released the book, I maybe had like 3,000 Twitter followers or something.
Okay.
But being involved in the communities and sort of building a little bit of a name for yourself just makes it that much easier to be able to find a position if you need it. And remote work is really common in my industry too. So it's not like I'm just limited to the companies that, where I live. In fact, I was already working a remote job for a company based out of Chicago at the time that I wrote the book, and I live in Cambridge, Ontario, Canada. So,
Right.
yeah, so it felt pretty low risk in that sense. Like I felt like worst case scenario, I can just get another job.
Yeah. I think that's a question a lot of people need to ask themselves too, is like they're afraid of like jumping into something because they fear that they won't, that they'll be, I don't know, end up on the streets or something, right? And
Sure.
oftentimes if you just stop to think like, well, what's the worst case scenario if this doesn't work out, or it doesn't work out right away? It's like, oh, I'll just go back and get another job. Okay, big
Yeah,
deal, right?
totally.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that can be easier or harder, of course, depending on like the industry you work in and what job you have or whatever. But
sure.
yeah, definitely important to actually think realistically. What is the real worst case scenario? Not this like paranoid worst case scenario that I haven't actually even thought through in my head. It's just like this like opaque fear that I don't even understand. Like it's worth like, maybe getting down with like a pen and paper and actually like writing
Yeah.
out, make it real and tangible.
Yeah, I believe for anyone listening who's interested going deeper in that, in Tim Ferriss' 4 Hour Work Week, he's got a whole section on that. I think he calls it fear setting. And I don't know
Mm.
if you've read that, but it's, yeah, he has these questions and exercises to actually, yeah, write that down. And I went through it and just been like, oh, wow, like, man, I can totally do what I'm thinking of. It's
Everything will
not,
be fine.
yeah, exactly. So a little tip for everyone there. Is there anything that you, looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently about that first launch?
The only thing that I think I would have done differently is not had such a short launch window. So everything that I'd read was kind of like, okay, well, if you want to sort of entice people to buy, you have to have like some sort of incentive when you first launch. You don't want to just launch it at regular price, and then what's the motivation to buy on day one versus like, oh, I'll check this out in a few months, whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
So a really common tactic is to do like a discount at launch. So I launched it with like it was like 25% off or something like that. And I ran the launch for 3 days. And I think like a lot of the information I had read kind of suggested like week or whatever. And I just wanted it to end on a Friday, and I launched it on a Wednesday. So whatever. But what happened was like Friday night, I was still getting sales like every 4 or 5 minutes. You know what I mean? And I had to sort of like honor my word. I had to just go and like turn off the discount, and that was like a horrible feeling because as soon as the book went up to full price, people stopped buying it.
Mm.
So I had this like hose shooting money at me basically, and I just went and turned it off for no reason. So I've sort of changed how I've approached sort of like launch windows since then, and it's worked out a lot better for me. So now what I do is I launch with a discount, but I don't really announce a specific end time at the time that the product is launched. Instead, I just announce that okay, it's on sale while during the launch. People buy it. A few weeks later, a month later, once like sales have sort of started to slow down a lot naturally, then I use that as an opportunity to email the list again and be like, hey, so next week is the last week to get the book at the launch price. And that sort of like kicks into gear like a second launch, basically. And
Wow.
you can squeeze a lot more out of the launch. And then I actually will close it down after that. So
Okay. Yeah, it's a really unique strategy. I don't really see, man, I don't think anyone else I've seen do that. So and it makes total sense. You're just like literally letting the audience, the market tell you when the momentum dies down,
yeah,
and that allows you to then set the deadline, which kicks up the momentum again. So like you said,
yeah,
you're almost getting two launches in one.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a really cool strategy. So by the way, I wanted to point out like what were the price of this ebook? You had like the two tiers, right?
Yeah, there's three tiers. So there's like a tier that was just the book, and that was $29. And then there was a tier that was a book plus I think it was like 15 screencasts or something, and that was $59. And then there was a third tier, which was the book, screencasts, and a sample project, which was $135.
Yeah. Man, I just wanted you to point that out because you mean you do $63,000 launch in 3 days, and these are not like it's not like you're selling $1,000 product here,
Sure. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
It's pretty cheap, really, in the grand scheme of things. And I have like kind of the breakdown here too of like how much revenue came from each tier. So like the cheapest tier did $7,500, the middle tier did 25,000, and the most expensive tier did 30,000. Even though, of course, the most expensive tier actually sold the fewest number of
right,
copies, but
yeah,
just having that option there for people to pay more, makes a huge difference. If I had just launched with a single tier and just had the same number of people buy just the single tier, I would have made like less than half the revenue total.
wow, yeah,
So definitely makes a big difference, especially when you're working on something like a book, which sort of has a sort of a market rate. You know what I mean? People are not willing to pay much more than maybe like $50 for an ebook, and that's kind of a stretch sometimes.
hmm,
So for a book, I think it's really important that you figure out ways to add extra value to it so that people will sort of evaluate the value of the package on its own instead of just having that connection in their brain to like, well, I can buy a book on Amazon for $19. Why is this book $100? You have to
sure,
figure out some way to like make it not feel like just a book and like a product that should be sort of evaluated on its own merit.
right. And again, I think it's again a pretty proven formula that you follow there that other people can follow is like, yeah, just kind of bare bones the book by itself, and then you had the book plus the basically what you taught in the book in action on screen, right?
Yeah,
Videos.
it wasn't even like new content really. Like the book was divided into two sections. There was like the first half of the book was sort of like sort of like more of like a theoretical overview of a lot of the ideas. And then the last half of the book was basically like examples and sort of practice. So what I did is I just took all the chapters in the second half of the book and recorded a video version of each one
Hmm.
for people who just like prefer learning in that format.
Yep.
So it wasn't any new ideas that weren't already in the book. I just provided it in a second format for people who wanted to watch the videos.
Yeah, and then the third tier, the highest tier, was that same thing. Plus, they could just download the actual the project, right?
That was new content, but it wasn't content created for the book. Actually, it was like an application that I had built the previous year that used a lot of the ideas from the book. Um, and I just decided, well, I'll just give people the code for this app so they can sort of see like what does it look like to use these ideas in a real like piece of software.
Yeah.
So I just gave
Yeah.
people all the code for that to look at and kind of
Yeah.
just pour through themselves. So that was like no extra work at all because I literally just took a zip file that was already on my computer and just threw it in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And I think there's probably so many people listening who have these assets that they don't even realize are assets that like you said, that tier made the most revenue and you just added something you already had. I mean, I'm thinking
Yeah.
of like, let's say there's a photographer who's going to teach photo editing. So they put out, an ebook for $40 and it's talks, gives a lot of advice teaching in written form how to edit for a certain kind of effect. And then they also, in a second tier, include just examples of them doing those things on video on the screen.
Yep.
And then the third tier is they just say, hey, here are some actual Photoshop files that I've done.
Yeah. So you
And
can see like, yeah, these are all the settings I used for all the
yeah,
different like plugins and
yeah,
how all the layers were organized or whatever. Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
yeah. So, yeah, that's an awesome tip there. So let's kind of speed up to kind of get to where you are now. I know you launched a second course, what, the following year?
It was only about like 6 months later, actually.
Okay. So you
Uh,
immediately went on to second course, which was what you said you originally really wanted to do. That's what you already had in your head.
yeah.
Um, yeah, which again is another really good takeaway for people is you had this really big thing that seemed like it would just take so long, but you wanted to get the ball rolling first, which is why you created this smaller project so that you
Yeah.
could get done quicker, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, okay. So then you launched your second course, and that one was like you were bang on about it because it was even bigger, right?
Yeah, that one did really well. So that did 100 grand on the first day.
Wow.
Um, I don't remember like the numbers over the kind of the whole launch period or sort of the first couple months or whatever, but that came in like 2016 and it's done about like $700,000 in revenue or something total. I mean, that's without really doing like a big like relaunch or, re-releasing it or anything. That's just kind of like the long tail of sales over that time period. Plus like, Black Friday sales and stuff like that. So there's some spikes in there, but
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah.
so that's done a lot better. Like the first book, I think lifetime has been like 220,000 or something, and then yeah, like triple that for
Wow.
the second product.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who bought your first product that then just automatically will buy. I shouldn't say automatically, but they're much more likely to buy your second one, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's really nice having like a list of people who have already given you money for something that you can pitch the next thing to for sure.
Yeah.
Especially if they were really happy with the first product too, right? So
Right. I think that's a key part. Yeah. That's
yeah,
yeah. Um, and then now you recently partnered up with someone and launched a new course, a new product, and you've done over $1 million with this, which is absolutely amazing. Congrats.
thanks.
Um, so yeah, like what can you maybe just tell us a little bit about this launch? I mean, did you follow the same strategy to launch this new product? And maybe if you can pick out a couple things that you think made the difference between your second launch, which was you said like 200 and something, versus taking this one 4 or 5 times that. What were the key differences there?
Sure. So the formula for like the actual launch was not that much different, right? It's like build a bunch of authority on the internet around a topic, announce a product, capture a bunch of emails for the product, send updates periodically, and keep sort of people excited about it. And then when it's done, put it on out on the internet for sale,
Right.
and tell the world about it. Um, I think the reasons that it did so well compared to the other products are a couple things. So one is just like the market for this product was a lot bigger. So historically, my products have been like programming related content for people who work in like a specific programming language or with like a specific programming tool, which automatically just kind of like shrinks the market down a little bit, right? But this product was actually like a design for developers product. And what that meant is that like there's all sorts of people who can benefit from this now, not just people who use PHP or people who just use Ruby or people who just use Python or whatever. Basically anyone making stuff on the internet, no matter what like technologies you're using under the hood, cares about making those things look good on the internet. So the market was a lot bigger.
Hmm.
The other thing was, I think we did a really good job sort of building our authority around the topic and building anticipation for it versus the products I did in the past. Like when I did the first book, that was probably like maybe like 6 or 8 months of sort of building authority on it, just not even intentionally, right? Because I didn't even have the idea for the book until like 2.5 months before I launched it. But that's when I first had started like talking about those ideas online. With this content, me and Steve, my kind of business partner, who we kind of worked on the product together, we had been sharing ideas and stuff around this for about 2 years before we launched the book. And we
Mm.
sort of had planned to do a product from the beginning. Like that was a reason that he wanted to start building his audience, because he had seen some of the success that I'd had with products. And he thought, man, it would be, I'd like love to get into that sort of thing too. So we just started kind of sharing design tips and stuff on Twitter. And I think together we are kind of fortunate in that, like, he's a designer, I'm a developer who cares about design. Because of that, I'm able to sort of act as like a bridge from like all these design ideas to getting those to like make sense to developers, because I'm a developer myself. Whereas I think a lot of other sort of content that's in the same space doesn't really resonate as well, because there's sort of like a, like a fence between like the designer brain and the developer brain, and it's hard to create content that really makes sense to someone who thinks so much differently than you.
Right.
So we started just like putting out these like design tips and stuff on Twitter. And I think when we started, Steve had like 800 Twitter followers or something that he had just sort of built up incidentally over being on Twitter for 6 years, not really using it deliberately or anything, but just, whatever. So we started sharing these like design tips and working really hard at them to make them really good. Like the amount of effort that we'd put into these like tips that we would share on Twitter was equivalent to the effort you put into a blog post. Um, but they just started really getting a lot of traction. And I think what helps a lot is they're very visual, right? So they kind of grab people's eyes. They're kind of scrolling through the timeline or whatever, and they're very actionable. And we just tried to make the content super tactical and practical. So it got to a point where like we're sharing some of these tips, and I think the biggest one that we did has like 15,000 likes and like 4,000 retweets or something, which
Mm-hmm.
is pretty crazy in our little kind of sphere. But they very regularly are like 1,000 to 2,000 retweets sort of thing. Like they get a lot of attention. And Steve was able to build up his audience because like we tweet everything through his account, because he's kind of the designer, even though we were working on the content together. He was able to build up his audience from like 800 to he just crossed 50,000 now in like two and a
Wow.
half years,
Wow.
just from sharing these ideas on the internet.
Yeah.
So while we were doing all that stuff, we knew we wanted to write a book or whatever, but we hadn't really said anything about it publicly, because we just wanted to sort of build up that goodwill and just like earn people's trust and, become the people that people wanted to learn this stuff from. So it wasn't until like we were having people regularly saying like, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? That we decided, okay, like I think we've sort of like compressed this like launch spring as like tight as we can get it at this
Mm.
point.
Yeah.
So why don't let's like buckle down and actually put together this product. So then we just threw up a landing page for that, started collecting emails. And I think the landing page was up from like July till we launched in December, and we put the landing page up in maybe July, maybe August. I think probably August. So like 4 months or something that was out there collecting emails. And we also had like some other avenues that we were collecting emails from too. Like we had a website where um, we just had an email sign up for people who wanted to see like want to get notified when Steve published like a new YouTube video or something, because he had been building a little bit of an audience there. He only put together like maybe 4 or 5 videos, but he did these sort of like redesigned videos, and some of those actually took off. Like one was the front page of Reddit and stuff like that, just random. Just a lot of it is, I don't know if it's luck, but like you make really, really good stuff and it gets noticed, right? So I think an emphasis on quality was really helpful for us. But yeah, so I think by the time we launched the book, the list that we launched to had like close to 30,000 people on it.
Mm-hmm.
So we launched that book in December, and we did the same sort of thing where we kind of put like the sales page up online sort of quietly the night before, went to bed at like 4 a.m. after we
Right.
had all that stuff done. And then we both woke up about 3 hours later, and we checked to see like had anyone bought overnight, and we had done $40,000 in sales without even telling people that it was available for sale.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we did like just under $400,000 on the first day and $1 million in the first month.
Wow. Man, it's so awesome. It's just like there's so many takeaways there. Like someone could just listen to those last few minutes, and you've pretty much just summed up like how to have a killer launch of your product. And it goes way back, like you said, for years of just like providing that value, just building up the authority in your market. And I think that's like a lot of people are maybe hesitant, right? They're like, maybe I could teach some stuff online, and that would be awesome to earn some money off of it. And um, maybe they're thinking way bigger dreams, like I want to quit my job, have financial freedom, all this stuff. But then they're not actually putting anything out there. And it's like,
Yeah.
so even if you don't know what you're going to create, like what kind of product you're going to put out and how to launch it and all that stuff, like, wouldn't you say, like, just jump in the community wherever people are? Like for you programmers, they were already on Twitter, so you were there. But if it's on a forum or if it's on a Facebook group, like just start contributing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's super crucial. Like the most the most leverage you can possibly have when you finally have something that you want to release is like a big audience of people who trust you. Like I have friends who have had incredible product launches who don't really like do any of like the marketing stuff properly. Like they don't even put up a landing page before the product's done. Like they just announce it when it's done, or they kind of mention it once in a while here and there, but they don't send out email updates. They don't do any email marketing. You know what I mean? They just don't do any of the things that people say you have to do to succeed at this stuff. But because they have this huge audience of people that trust them just from creating content online, that like more than makes up for any like quote unquote mistake you can make in any other area. Whereas I don't think the opposite is true at all. I don't think you can like out market a lack of audience, you know?
Mm.
So
Yep.
I think, yeah, exactly what you said. Even if you have no idea what you want to make, but you know that one day you might want to make something, like the best thing you can do now is start building up that audience and that asset, because it's the biggest leverage that you can possibly have.
Right. And if you wait until a year or 2 years from now, well, then you're just starting from scratch right then. Whereas if you're
Exactly.
putting stuff out now and in 2 years, like I'm ready to launch a product, you've already got the
Yeah.
trust, the
Yeah.
audience, right? Yeah.
And that's the problem. Like someone will have an idea for a product and they'll be like, okay, so where should I start? What should I do first? Should I put up a landing page? It's like, well, you have no audience. So who are you going to share this landing page with? A lot of people say like the first step to validating a product idea is to like put up a landing page or start collecting emails. And I'm sure that can make sense in some markets, or if you're building something where you're intending for your main source of traffic to be like organic search or something like that. But for me, at least, like putting up a landing page is sort of the very last step in validating an idea. The all the steps I take before that are like sharing information on Twitter, putting together blog posts, putting together a screencast, giving a conference talk, and just like measuring the engagement and seeing like, is this resonating? Are people excited about this stuff? And by the time I finally put up like a landing page for something, I'm already 99.9% sure that it's going to be a successful product, because I've been sort of testing these ideas in so many other ways way before that.
Yep.
So when someone's like, okay, I have an idea for a product, I have no audience, I'm going to put up a landing page and see what happens. Like it's not going to work. Like the first step is actually, okay, now that you have an idea for a product, spend the next 2 years becoming like a known quantity in your community. And now you can announce the product, and people don't like hearing that. So the best thing you can do to avoid being in that situation is to start building an audience way before you have an idea for a product.
Right. And it's so true that it's like it's not the advice that most of us want to hear, right? We want to hear the formula for having the $60,000 launch 2 months from now, when you haven't done anything yet before.
Yeah.
And have some people done that? Yeah, sure. I don't know. Maybe they've got a lot of money to put behind ads or whatever. But like, at the end of the day, it's that whole launch spring that you talked about. I think that's such a good metaphor or good image for it. Is like, the longer that you compress that spring, the more powerful
The
the
launch will
the
be,
launch
yeah.
is going to be. And if you're only pushing that spring down for you know a month or 2 months or even 6 months compared to like a year, then it's just the results are gonna follow that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, man, this is what's one of the reasons I love talking to you and hanging out with you, is because you you really always like bring things back down to like the fundamentals of online business, right? Which is just giving value, building the audience, and then eventually making offers. Like that's it. and there's so many different ways you can go about each one of those steps. But you've done. I think you're really unique in the sense that for someone who is an entrepreneur selling online info products, correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem to be very disconnected from the online marketing world. Like as
Yeah.
far as I know, you're not listening to online marketing podcasts, you're not buying
No.
courses about online marketing. You're just like you're just doing it and that's it. And I find that so refreshing. And is that like a conscious thing on your part? Like do you purposely avoid that stuff?
I don't think it's super conscious. I definitely think like I have been sucked into certain topics like once in a while, but um what happens for me at least is sometimes like I'll get down some path of learning about like some tactic that's going to like help me make more money or whatever. And then I kind of like have to like shake my head and step back for a second and think about it from like my own sort of perspective as like a potential customer for something. It's like, would I want to buy from someone who like uses whatever X shady marketing tactic or whatever? And I just realized like no, and my audience are going to be just like me. So, and then the other element of it is I've just found that like no amount of effort put into trying to maximize what I'm doing with conversion rates or whatever can ever compete with just like putting that same amount of energy into just making more free content for people.
Hmm.
Like no, like trying to A/B test a headline, is not going to make me more sales than just putting out another great free guide or something.
Right.
So for me, like what ends up working best is just like focusing on delivering value and just knowing that like the most like valuable asset I can possibly have is like the trust of a large group of people. So it's as simple as that for me. Like if I can only be working on like one thing at a time, like I'm always optimizing for like how can I continue to earn the trust of a large group of people.
Hmm.
And anything that's like not working towards that goal just doesn't seem like it could possibly compete with the ROI that I'm going to get from that.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's such an important reminder for all of us. For myself, it's just like you've got to make sure you are putting deposits in the
Yeah.
audience and giving that value. If you ever want to hope to make a withdrawal one day, so and I think it also comes down to really knowing your audience and uh, like for you, you said you kind of said there my audience isn't going to buy from someone who's using these shady marketing tactics. And I think
Yeah.
that's like
Yeah.
every group of people is different, right? And I can see maybe for when you're talking interacting to computer programmers, like I'm picturing very logical mind, it has to make sense for them in order to buy this. And if you're trying some marketing tactic that is just like designed to push, pressure someone into something
Yeah.
and
Like some super emotionally kind of driven approach.
right. Exactly. They're not going to respond to that. And you know that because you are one.
Hmm.
And so you put that into practice, right? And it's like even though, you might be getting these marketing tips which might work great in another market, you can recognize that that's not maybe going to be the best way for you to go forward. And again, that it all comes back to the same point. The only reason you know that is because you're always engaged in the community and interacting with people and providing value, right? So
For
it's like
sure.
virtuous circle, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So man, this has been great. If someone is listening here and they hear your story and they're like, "Man, I need to get on this. Like, I need to get started." Like, what would you tell them? Like, what should they do tomorrow or even today, right after they listen to this podcast? What would you tell them? What should they go do right now?
I think like I kind of talked about before, the most important thing you can do if you want to start sort of getting noticed is to work in public. So that doesn't even necessarily mean putting energy into like creating new content and new ideas. It just has to mean like being public about what you're doing. So if you're working on like some personal project or something, making sure that you're talking about it and sharing what you're learning about it as you go. Like I think some of my favorite pieces of content that I consume are just people telling their stories as they're working on something. And yeah, it's a little bit of work to create that content, but that isn't the same as trying to find time to devote to figuring out, okay, what's something that I can just like teach for the sake of teaching it, you know what I mean? So I think there's lots of opportunities that you can, like, for creating content that don't necessarily mean inventing new things or putting together something that's designed necessarily to be educational. You just have to sort of like let people in on the story, and I think that can go a long way.
Yeah, that the awesome thing is that something that someone can do, even if they are kind of like towards more the beginner end of things. Like if they're like, man, I'm just starting out in this field, whether it's, I don't know, video, music, programming, whatever. Again, rather than waiting 2 years until you're like way better at it to start sharing, like just start sharing what you're learning. And that's
Hmm.
then you don't have to, like you said, you're not coming up with like, what's the best lesson I could teach right now. It's just like, just share something, continually share what you're learning, bring people along on the journey, which I love that perspective is because it's like that literally means that anyone can start right now. Even if you're just
Yeah,
literally picking up a guitar for the first time, start making YouTube videos about every new technique you learn or every new song that you learn and what are the big things that are helping you get better? Like it's something as simple as that.
100%. And yeah, like we kind of talked about before, there's always someone who's like a few steps behind you that's going to be able to learn from you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, you don't need like John Petrucci to teach you how to play the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star on the guitar. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or and again, like there's a lot of things that people who are really good at something, like they just like forget something that people are trying to learn. Like, one of the most annoying things for me about like trying to learn a new topic is when there's all this like sort of assumed knowledge from all the resources I find, and nothing tells me like that one missing piece that's like, oh, by the way, like, yeah, you're supposed to have a guitar pick when you play the guitar. Oh, that solves all my problem. You know what I mean? Like, um,
Yeah.
just things like that. So I think, again, I think it's really important that I think the best time to teach something is like when you just learned it. So there's no need to wait until you're an expert. And yeah, the other thing too, I think, is like just learning in public will help you get better faster too. Like, a friend of mine, Justin, he does these YouTube streams, and he has a bit of an audience already in a sort of a different space, but he's trying to learn programming. And he knows he's not a programmer, like he has no programming experience, and he has nothing to teach when it comes to programming, but he's still creating content about it because he'll create these YouTube streams that are like, he calls them like dumb programmer questions, where he just does a live stream of him trying to do something, and people will come in the chat and help him and stuff, and people watch it like just for fun and just because they, they think he's a cool guy or whatever. And one day he's going to be a good programmer, and programmers are going to know about him because of like this journey, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think yeah, don't be like embarrassed about what you don't know, or if you think other people know something more than you. Like, I kind of like a funny joke that is shared around in like the programming communities a lot is that the best way to learn how to do something is to write a blog post about the wrong way to do it. You know what I mean? So like, if you're trying to figure something out and you can't figure out the best way to do it, and you're asking people questions like, how do I do this? And no one answers or whatever. If you want to learn like the right way to do it, just like decide that I know this is a bad way, but I'm going to teach this as like the correct way to do it. I'm going to
Right.
put it out on the internet. I'm going to say the best way to do whatever. And there will be people just flocking to the comments telling you, you're stupid. This is how you should do it. It's like, perfect. That's what I needed to know that no one would have told me when I was just asking them.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot that you can really accelerate sort of your learning too, just by kind of sharing what you're doing, and it's a great way to just practice teaching too.
Yeah. The last question for you when it comes to like, so have this message, this common theme is just like, just put stuff out there, just get stuff out there. Even if you don't think it's the best way, just put it out anyway. Um, Most people, I think there's an insecurity there, right? It's like, well, what if I'm judged? What if people criticize me? Do you have any tips or advice for someone who's maybe feeling like that? Like they hear this advice, but it's still they're frozen by like, well, I don't want to get negative feedback. I don't want people to tell me I'm wrong.
Uh, it's a tough one for sure. I think the best thing you can do is to just try and like fight through that, because the rewards are outweigh like the negatives so much. Like, the really common fear that people have, like I think it's like the most common fear on earth is public speaking. Like, no one likes public speaking. Everyone's afraid of public speaking.
Hmm.
And the only way to like conquer that fear is to just like force yourself to do public speaking. And once you actually do it, you realize, you know what, this is actually not that bad, and there's all these benefits from it. And eventually you get to a point where it's like fun and exciting and you're relaxed and whatever, right? So um, I think those fears are sort of irrational in a lot of sense, because like the worst thing that can happen is like nothing bad is going to happen from you sharing what you're learning. And I think if you are really afraid of it, like something that you can do to mitigate it a little bit is just remember that like you don't have to share from like from the perspective of an authority. You don't always have to be like saying like, this is how you should do something, this is how you should do something. Like um especially if you're afraid that like you don't actually know like the best way to do something because you're still learning it, just
Mhm.
focus on talking about like what you're doing. It's like, today I tried this out and this is how it worked out, and I think this is kind of cool because XYZ. And no one's going to come and be like, you know, you're harming the community by sharing this information or whatever. Worst case scenario, someone's going to be like, actually, you could do this instead, and this is a little bit better for blah 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 blah. And that's not going to hurt your ego, because you didn't frame the content as like you're some expert trying to teach it. You're literally just saying like, I'm trying this. Like, I think this element of it is kind of cool, whatever. So it's creating content. People are going to follow it if they're interested in it or whatever. And like, you sort of like disarmed anyone's ability to really like attack you over it, because you're not telling people what to do or acting like an expert. You're literally just like talking about stuff that you're trying. And I've always found that to be like I've always preferred like consuming content that's written in that way too. Like when I'm listening to podcasts, I hate listening to stuff where it's people just like answering specific questions, saying like, "Oh, here's like the 5 best marketing tactics you should try. I'm going to list them out for you," whatever. I much prefer listening to stuff where it's just like two dudes telling their story, talking about like, "Yeah, last week like we tried doing this, and we think it's working out, but we don't know." And you know what I mean? It's like you're just speaking like from your own experience,
Mhm.
talking about what you've tried, what's worked for you, not necessarily like dictating what other people should be doing, or how they should be doing whatever. I think that makes it a lot easier to sort of not get as scared about that sort of things, because if you're just talking about your own experiences, well, no one can argue with your own experiences. You know what I mean? You
Right.
just have to make sure you're not setting yourself up for negative feedback by framing and everything in such like a, like telling people what they should be doing way. Just talk about yourself and what you're doing and what works for you. And
Yeah. Just be authentic.
yeah.
Don't try to be someone you're not. Um, Man, that I think that's a great place to leave it. This was super valuable, man. You've given me lots of ideas just during this call. I've just been making notes of things I could put into practice. Just yeah, exactly like you said. Just listening to your story of how you built this business to where it is right now. Just full of insights for people. So thanks so much for doing this. If someone wants to learn more about what you're doing or follow you online, where should they go?
Sure. So I'm most active on Twitter. So just twitter.com/Adam Wathan. I have a blog personal website at adamwathan.me, where occasionally I'll share some business related stuff, but it's mostly just programming stuff. But there is that article that I kind of talked about that kind of outlines my first launch, which I think will be something worth checking out for people. But
Yep.
yeah, that's probably the best place to follow.
All right, we will link that up for everyone. And yeah, it's good to catch up, man. Thanks again for your time and thanks for coming on and sharing that with us.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for getting me set on the path to ever doing this stuff in the first place. I'd probably still just be working a regular job if I hadn't asked you out for coffee that one day. So
Man, crazy how things work out. Well, I can't take really any credit for what you've created, but it's been awesome to be on this journey. So thanks, man. Take care.
cool.
All
Thanks.
right.